Morning, everybody. Just a sound check so that you can know your audio is working. Good morning to everybody. We'll start in a few minutes' time and just admitting a lot of colleagues into the meeting.
Sound is fine. Morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Morning again to everybody. Just to make sure your audio is working, you can set your volumes. We're just admitting more people into the meeting, so we'll start in about 5 minutes' time. Thank you for joining the session. Right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the session today, 16th of March. Really appreciate you joining us today. We're looking forward to spending some time with you talking about a very important topic in the world. And if I can share my screen with you quickly, we just have a look at what's going to happen today. So there we are. We're talking today about the state of our current logistics network. And we've got an excellent panel of presenters today to share their views. And at the end of the event, we'll have a questions and answers session. We're proudly being hosted today by the South African Association of Freight Forwarders, and Dr. Junita Maria agreed to act as our MC. So thank you very much, Dr. Maria. We really appreciate your support, always supporting the Transport Forum and all the mentorship you provide to us. We really appreciate that. So ladies and gents, just a little bit of housekeeping quickly. As you might have noticed, we're doing it, the session in a meeting fashion. It's not a webinar fashion. In other words, you can unmute yourselves and so on. So please, we ask that you do not unmute yourself until you've been prompted to do so, and that's during the questions and answers. So what we do is we do not encourage questions and answers after the presentations or during the presentations. We will do that, allow questions and answers at the end of the event during questions and answers. You're also welcome to make use of the chat room to, ask questions in the chat room for the panelists. The people following on YouTube, you're welcome to use the text box in YouTube to text questions to the panelists, and we'll also address your questions as much as we can. Ladies and gents, you can see our panel of presenters here. We've got Mr. Theo Boshoff from the Agricultural Business Chamber. We've got Professor Jan Havenga, who's an independent researcher, many years involved in the state of the logistics of our country. And we've got Mr. Claude de Bassek. I'm not 100% sure, Claude, how that surname is pronounced, but hopefully Claude will forgive us. But Claude is the CEO of Economics, and so we're listening, looking forward to talking to them and listening to them. Ladies and gents, the Transport Forum, good news is this month is the Transport Forum's birthday month, so we're 16 years old, and so we're proud and obviously made possible by all of your, supporting the Transport Forum all these years, and we thank you for that. So obviously, everything at the Transport Forum in terms of attendance and related content on the web are complementary to the public. And hence we have very important alliance partners and media houses and sponsors that make the Transport Forum possible. And we quickly want to give recognition to that. But also important is, as you might have noticed, that in this first portion of the event, there are 2 prizes to be won, and you might be one of the lucky winners. And how we're going to do that is we're going to give recognition to our alliances and sponsors of the Transport Forum. At the end of that, we're going to ask 2 questions, and the first person making use of the chat room or answers the question correct will be the winner of the prize. And the prize, each prize is this nice magneto rechargeable LED compact light. You'll have that couriered to you, so we obviously will obtain your preferred delivery address of the event, and we'll have the prize couriered to you. So let's have a look then. The Transport Forum proudly have formal associates. There are many professional bodies, participating in the Transport Forum, but these are proudly formally associated with the Transport Forum. We really appreciate that. So let's kick off with our hosting organization today, and that is the African Association of Freight Forwarders. Dr. Maria will tell you more about them when she presents, but you can see they already established in 1921 as a national association with members throughout the Republic of South Africa, and they make a major contribution to facilitating trade within South Africa. So the member companies manage over 80% of South Africa's international trade. So thank you very much, Dr. Maria, for all your support. We really appreciate it. We've got the South African Express Parcel Association, SEPA. It's a representative body and a voice of the express delivery industry in South Africa. We've got the Road Freight Association. They say with our Trucks of Africa stops, representing the truckers of our country. And we've got, excuse me, we've got the African Rail Industry Association. Their vision is to have a world-class rail infrastructure across Africa, quite a challenge. So they say their mission is to advocate for the rail industry and third-party access to the country's railway network. So thank you very much, ARIA, for all your support. We've got the South African Bus Operators Association. They're the voice for the bus and coach industry, play a vital role in social and economic development of our country, already formed in 1980. Thank you, Sabawa. And then we've got media houses involved with the Transport Forum. Now, obviously, there are many of them, but these are an informal arrangement with the Transport Forum. So we've got Freight News and all these organizations. Obviously, you're welcome to interrupt me should you really want to say a few words yourself on your organization. You're welcome to interrupt me then. So Freight News, also known as Freight and Trading Weekly, been actually part of the Transport Forum since inception. News and features for import and export decision makers, all about the logistics industry. You definitely need to subscribe to these magazines. We've got Railways Africa magazine, the African Continent Specialist Trade Technical Business-to-Business online publication, covering all aspects of the rail sector. So Railways Africa magazine. And then we've got Crema Media's Engineering News, considered a premier source of real economy news, daily coverage of South Africa's transport and automotive sectors, and accurate and timely news reportage. And Crema Media Engineering News, they also give us a nice video of the week's wrap-up of the news. So let's have a look at this video.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Engineering News and Mining Weekly magazine, published on Friday, 17 March 2023. In this...
So I don't know what happened there with this video.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Engineering News and Mining Weekly magazine, published on Friday, 17 March 2023. In this week's cover article, Engineering News and Mining Weekly contributing editor online Tasneem Bulbulia asked whether South Africa can address deficiencies in securing global exploration spend. Although global exploration spend in mining is increasing, South Africa, despite boasting a plethora of mineral resources, is not capitalizing on this, especially compared with similarly mineral-rich African countries. The Engineering News features focus on Water Week, where power outages are dimming water supply efficiencies. Chemicals and petrochemicals, where a supplier offers on-site training to improve operations. And Food and Beverage, where an initiative sets out to improve the tavern experience. The Mining Weekly features focus on underground mining, where a multi-million rand shaft construction soldiers on. This week's business leader is Chris Norton, Regional Director for Africa of VM Software. And as this week's cartoon shows, the newly appointed Minister of Electricity seems to have embraced the project manager title that many commentators felt Mineral Resources and Energy Minister Gwede Mantashe had bestowed on the portfolio in order to belittle its role. We hope you enjoy this week's edition of Crema Media's Engineering News and Mining Weekly. Be sure to subscribe to the magazine that offers you in-depth news about developments in the real economy by emailing subscriptions@engineeringnews.co.za. Enjoy the read and see you next time.
Great, thank you, Engineering News. Ladies and gents, let me introduce you to the platinum sponsor of the Transport Forum, Ctrack. It's a leading global software as a service provider and a big data company for vehicle tracking, fleet management, and insurance telematics solutions. Been part of the Transport Forum also since inception, many years, actually more than the 16 years. And we've got a nice video of Ctrack.
Maximizing fleet uptime, whether big or small, is a daunting and time-consuming task. Introducing Crystal, the all-new innovative and all-encompassing data platform from Ctrack. Saves you time and money, helping you to streamline your vehicle fleet and asset control. Ctrack Crystal, configurable by you to your needs, means no more time-consuming and unnecessary dashboards and reports. Only clear and precise data in real time, in the cloud, and accessible from anywhere in the world on any device. Simplify your driver management, task deployment, and communication through proactive driver behavior monitoring to ensure safe driving, less collisions, and in turn reduced insurance costs and third-party claims. With the Crystal app, the power is in your hands. Ctrack Crystal, your tool for a more productive fleet, more proactive decision-making, and ultimately, a better return on your fleet and asset investment. So whether you're on the beach in Bali, the sand dunes of the Sahara, or sunny South Africa, your fleet will always be safe, productive, and always visible.
Thank you so much, Ctrack. Ladies and gents, University of Johannesburg also been involved since inception. The Department of Transport and Supply Chain Management. They also have the Institute for Transport and Logistics Study. Prof. Jackie Walters, Prof. Nalin Pisa, Prof. Rose Rook, Peter Kilburn, a lot of them been mentoring myself, also part of the planning. So I really appreciate UJ's support. Thank you very much. Standard Bank, more than 160 years of experience. They're gold sponsor of the Transport Forum. They believe that dreams matter and that together we can make them a reality. Thank you, Standard Bank, for gold sponsorship. JC Auditors, I don't know if all of us online to say a few words. Maybe he's joining a little bit later. As you can see, it's all about certification, compliance, and one solution. So they are a SANAS accredited certification body providing internationally recognized certifications. Thank you, JC Auditors. Global Trade Solution, innovative solutions transforming the global supply chain. You can see they're doing consulting and strategy, software solutions and specialized services, very much for the imports and exports industry. Thank you, Louise Widget and team, for your gold sponsorship. Pegasus, changing lives, changing worlds. So they leverage the sector-leading expertise and experience to craft and implement mobility solutions which work and have substantial impact. You can see the sectors: cities, climate, energy, resilience, transport, waste, and water. Thank you, Pegasus, for your excellent gold sponsorship. Unitron Supply Chain Solutions, innovation, expertise, deliver. That's their slogan. And they're a leading provider of integrated transportation, warehousing, and supply chain-based services to customers with a variety of needs, offering bespoke value propositions in each segment. Thank you very much, Unitrons. But Air Cargo fulfills the needs of the express cargo industry for daytime and overnight cargo capacity across comprehensive Southern and East Africa footprint. Thank you, Bid Air Cargo. Ticket Pro Travel, they actually have two products. They're sponsoring the Transport Forum in gold sponsorship. The one here is the online booking tool. So online corporate travel booking tool with everything you need and nothing you don't want. You can see no hidden fees, just good business with straightforward fair pricing. So it's a very convenient tool for all your corporate online booking needs. Thank you, Ticket Pro, for this gold sponsorship. And then from the same body, Ticket Pro, they've got a smart tab solution. And this system includes key features like comprehensive route management, flexible passenger payment methods, flexible route and fare product setup, shift and dispatch management, cashier system, inspection tools, and comprehensive management information system reports. Thank you very much, Ticket Pro. Zutari, consulting engineering of note, I can say Impact Engineer. Zutari, also many years a gold sponsor of the Transport Forum, previously known as Oricon. Thank you, Zutari. I really appreciate your support. Kuba, they're transforming ticketing, part of the ICM Mobility Group, which enables public and private transport to move in the digital era. You can see they're doing journey planning, smart ticketing, streamlining electronic payment, shaping the digital transformation of the mobility sector. Thank you so much, Kuba, for your gold sponsorship. EasyClear, leading software provider for the customs and clearing industry. You can see custom clearing, freight forwarding, and logistic providers covering air, sea, road, and rail. Thank you, EasyClear. So those are the sponsors of the Transport Forum and Alliance partners. So let's give them a big hand. And thanks to their support for making the Transport Forum possible. We really appreciate their support. Ladies and gents, I would like you to give you opportunity now to partake in this little quiz we're going to have. And I'm going to put back our sponsors. There we are. And what you can do is you can get yourself ready in the chat room. Let's have a little bit fun here. And let's now ask the two questions. So the first person who answers the question right will be the winner of this. So the first question, and that's in the chat room. So the first question I'm going to ask you now is, who is our hosting association today? There we go to Jacob van Rensburg. All right, congratulations, Jacob. We'll have the prize courier to you. The second question, here it comes. It's a supply chain solutions provider, and the slogan is innovation, expertise delivered. There, Raylene, congratulations. You've got that one. Very sharp. We will have your prizes courier to you. Congratulations. I'm still admitting more colleagues into the session. Ladies and gents, I just want to refresh your memory about the Transport Forum's business directory. Well categorized, very popular. The companies being listed here are giving us feedback, and they having lots of views on this business directory. It's only 450 rands per year. It's one of our BEE initiatives. We outsourced this to Olga Mashilu's company, and she's administrating this. So you will see a number on the screen. You're welcome to take a picture there of a number and contact us. It will help you to get listed. And also after this event, you should receive an email requesting your feedback. And we urge you to give us feedback on these events, because we need your feedback also, especially in terms of topics for future events and so on. And in this email, you'll also be given the opportunity to indicate whether you want Olga to contact you, to get your company listed. So that is the very popular business directory. Right, the Transport Forum, Transport Forum's website, transportsec.com. This is the website where you can download all the presentations presented today, and obviously all the presentations presented before, since inception of the Transport Forum. There are more than 900 presentations you can download. So you might ask the question, how am I going to do this? So what you do is if you visit that website, and that's not that website, should you visit transportsec.com, you will see to the left of your screen, there will be user login area. And this user login area, you can type in your username and password, you log in, and then you go to events. You'll see events, and you go to downloads, and you will get the downloads little search engine. Should you not have an account with the Transport Forum yet, it's all complimentary. You go to user menu, you click on sign up, and you create your own, login script, as I say, your own username and password. The system will send you an email confirming your email address, and you will then be able to download presentations. So you go to events, downloads, and you'll get this simple little search engine. Now, this search engine, you'll see there are two ways you can search for content. And the one way is that you can use the top field here, find by title or description. And you can type in there, for example, a topic like logistics, and you hit search, and then it will search all those 900 presentations for all presentations presented over these years in terms of logistics. Or you can type in a person's surname, so. Or you can use the bottom one, the category one, and you select category and you select the day's date or the event's date and hit search, and it will bring up all the presentations presented on that day. So as simple as that, and you can download many content. So it's a very, very powerful search engine. Alrighty, so that brings us back to our program for today. The state of our current logistics network, 16th of March 2023, proudly being hosted by the South African Association of Freight Forwarders, and would like to hand you over now today to our MC and our host, Dr. Unita Maria. She's the Chief Executive Officer of South African Association of Freight Forwarders, and she's going to do the introduction, overview, and the update on recent events. Thank you very much, Dr. Maria.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you, colleagues. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Yes. Thank you very much, colleagues. I think as Harry started off, we have a very exciting program, and I think we have good speakers. We select them to complement each other, and hopefully we can tell you a good story today, because I think our environment is not filled currently with good stories. So maybe we can inspire you to collaborate better. So I'm going to share my screen, Harry, if you just can help me to see if it comes through.
We can see it, just slide view.
Yes, I'm just going to do slide view. I think it just takes a bit of, okay.
Excellent.
And I just need my pointer, if you just stay with me. I think it's pointer. Thank you. So colleagues, I prepared 8 slides for you just to set the narrative, because I don't think you came to listen to me, although it's important to set the narrative. I think we want to have good impact with Theo of what they're doing currently with Transnet and Logistics Network in terms of an interface agreement. And then as the program showed, we will go to Professor Havenga, that will give us a bit of background on how does all the matrix talk to each other, and are we working in a multimodal sector. And then lastly, Claude will give us some indications of, is there a tight link between the logistics network, the economy, the growth, and the jobs that we currently experience in our landscape. So with that, we all know supply chain consists out of processes, definitely problem solving, because that's what we do on a daily basis. And more importantly, we mustn't disturb the balance, because the balance will help us in terms of cost, efficiency, and customer satisfaction. And ultimately, what we can see now, we work in South Africa in a very changing environment, well, a constant changing environment. Then, if I look at the logistics network, so I prepared for you a couple of slides in this, and I want you to stay with me on that, because the logistics network with an aerial view seems very easy. It seems that there's very clear definitions and very clear pictures of where's the raw material, who moves the raw material to the production site, where's the warehouse, and the ultimate customer. But what brings the complexity in is not in the real world that we see it like that, because this is a nice picture and we can see it, but it's got very different linkages in the supply chain. And also what I didn't put in here is that there's a reverse logistics element, and we can see now we've got e-commerce that actually works with very short timelines in the supply chain. And to make it more complex, you will have in the media, you'll see that as well now, our rail network is not where it should be, but you need all the modalities in a balanced multimodal structure. You need to make sure that you've got the road modality, the air. We don't have road trains in South Africa, then the rail, and then the sea, the pipeline, and the conveyor. And conveyor is very much important. I think it was now in the news also the last couple of months, is in Richards Bay. So unless you understand the linkage of those 3 key denominators, it's difficult to see how they interact with each other, because it's not one above another one. There's an interaction between those modalities. Then this is a busy slide, but I want you to focus on that, because I mean, I show you the picture, then I went now to the how it links. Then now we come to this very important one, or the modalities, this important one, to say that it's not as easy or simple as I showed the first picture. This is really how the supply chain works. You've got your logistics layer, which we know that it comes from origin to destination, and how the different role players interact with each other. You've got then the transaction layer, which goes from order to supplier's invoice, to a packing list, to a through bill of lading, order bill of lading, e-way bill of lading, which we can see comes in now on the air freight space, and then ultimately a proof of delivery if the supply chain has been concluded. Then on top of that, you've got the entities, and the entities underpin that depends how the bank flows, because in the import cycle and export cycle, you've got the unique consignment number, and then that makes sure that you need to match then the transaction layer with the logistics layer and with the entity flow. And then on top of that is where the government operates. So the government makes sure that we don't, or we're not involved with illicit movement, and they control the import cycle, the export cycle, and then also you have other government agencies to make sure that we can operate in a compliant, safe, and secure trading environment. Now, important with those 4 layers, it's to make sure that they talk to each other timelessly, and we can see now with digitalization it's possible to do that. But when I look at all those pictures, you can see it's very complex, because I start with the first one, then it goes a bit with the modalities, and then it goes into the detail. Now, Professor Katona with Debbie was looking, and they brought out a very nice book in terms of supply chain transformation, is that it's no longer companies that compete, it's more supply chains that compete. And if we compete in supply chains, we need to make sure that there's an alignment. And with all the studies they brought in, and I will show you the thinking methodology of Roger Martin, and also what they've done in terms of the PIAD, which is the priority to say what is the logic thinking, is that unless you bring an alignment in the supply chain, you are not moving forward. You think you're moving forward, and you think supply chains can evolve themselves, but they can't evolve themselves because it's a design. And we all know that underpinned to the supply chain is people, and people have behavior. And unless you bring that alignment in the culture, we will not be able to move forward. And what I want to do here is focus specifically on SA Inc. And that's very important. If we look at the marketplace in this whole diagram, they bring the marketplace together with the internal working of a company. And you can replicate that to South Africa as well. You can say that the world is the marketplace for South Africa, and how do we take our internal capabilities in South Africa and we match it to the marketplace. And the only way that we can bring that alignment is with the culture. And unfortunately, right now, our culture in South Africa is not conducive to understand how the supply chain moves. So I'm going to take you to the 2 theories that underpin this dynamic alignment in the supply chain. And that's why I want to set the narrative, because Theo will come and talk about the interface agreement and how they see ACBIS, the agricultural. And then, as I said, Professor Havenga will come and give you a bit of statistics and how the model works together. And then lastly, Claude will talk about the economic, how does it fit? So unless we always bring it back to our culture and to the alignment, I can tell you we're not going to move forward. And it's very important that we portray that SA Inc. needs to move forward. So in this, a bit of context, and you probably know that all, that's the theory of logic. So it was always that you've got the developer, the designer, and the feeling, or let's say the integrator, and that all comes back like, what is the logic in the leadership and how does people behave? Because once you understand where your country is and how people behave and what is the logic, you will then be able to understand how the culture must make sure that you get the alignment. Then the last one is what we can see, and I think that's the knowledge of thinking, and that's been designed by Roger Martin. That was very important to say that we operate in a marketplace, and the marketplace is filled with mystery and complexity. That's what we see there. But then there needs to come a process where you find alignment in some of the ideas. And then ultimately you go to the algorithm where countries want to operate because they have now best practice and they've got a certain predictability. And I will give you an example in that. Maybe the best one will be McDonald's. McDonald's was not in the early 90s, or they actually developed later because they read the market correctly. They were saying that people want fast food, They want a quick thing. They don't have time to waste, and they want to make sure that when they order, they can get their food within 10 or 15 minutes. So that's why they have in the next phase to make sure that they understand the patterns. What is the patterns of the market, and can they fulfill that patterns? And where they are now, McDonald's, if you look at their study, they've perfect now their algorithm. They know now best practice, they obtain efficiency, and that's where they want to operate. And I think that's where we want to operate as a country, in this algorithm space. So we need to read our external market correctly, because we're an open economy. 60% of our goods are being imported, exported. We must make sure that we read the patterns, and then we design the algorithm. But to come back, we can only do that effectively in the supply chain if we work on the culture where we can get the alignment. So I hope today, when I hand over to Theo, and then after the coffee break, we have Professor Havenga and Claude. After the webinar, you will understand what is the importance that we need to bring the alignment. We don't want to fight with public or private sector. That's not going to help us. We need to bring a culture of collaboration, insights, and hear each other. So I'll stop sharing here, and I hope I set the narrative for us to continue on today's session. So with that, Harry, I'm going to hand over to Theo to take us through his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Unita, and thanks very much for that kind introduction. I liked your point about the culture of collaboration, because that's exactly with the interface agreement what we've been trying our utmost to achieve. If you give me 1 second, let me quickly see if I can share my screen. There we go. Apologies. Let me just put it in slideshow view. Great. I hope everyone can hear and see it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So just by means of a brief introduction, so my name is Theo Borster from the CEO of Agricultural Business Chamber, AgBiz. So we're, like SELF, we're an industry association, but focusing on the value chain for agriculture. So it's mostly the manufacturers and importers of inputs, the likes of fertilizers, seeds, chemicals, etc. The storage operators, the off-takers, the processors, the agents, the exports. So not farmers specifically, but almost the value chain, everything around the farmers or producers, as we like to call them, that that it actually enables it to get onto farm and off farm, and eventually into the international supermarkets right across the world. So just a couple of disclaimers. We represent primarily cargo owners and exporters. We're not specifically logistic companies. We silo operators, exporters, etc. But we got involved in logistics because it poses such a big threat. It's such a big challenge, I think, to the value chains. Agriculture is actually very export orientated, especially the fruit industry, and even where we don't export, the basic food staples, roughly a third of the price of bread, of maize meal, etc., can all go down to, all comes down to ascribed to transport. So that's why logistics is incredibly important and why we got involved in it. So we don't have a direct interest in privatization, but we want an efficient logistic network and framework that works. So where this came from, and I like how it actually links up to what Unita was saying, is we had in the Port of Cape Town quite a terrible season at the end of 2021, beginning of 2022, where there were some management challenges. I think a lot of the staff went on leave at a critical time, between Christmas and New Year's, which is the peak export season for some of the horticultural products. And the industry lost roughly R1 billion in terms of value, with the quality declining, obviously, with good perishable products, the longer it takes. So there was a lot of maybe ugly things said in the media, I think, by the sector, etc. And it was a bit of a spat with Transnet. So we decided to come together in the Port of Cape Town in February, and we essentially said, well, they can't go on like this. We need to find the proper way forward, a way to build a logistics framework, a system that's fit for purpose. So that's where the group CEO actually made the proposal of an interface agreement. So that's Transnet speak, I think, for an MOU, and essentially what it entails is it's obviously a statement of intent, so a statement to work together. It includes a non-disclosure agreement, so we can share certain information where that's required. But ultimately, the aim of that was to identify what we need from the logistics framework, and then identify the gaps and build a business case for public-private partnerships. When I mentioned building the business case, so we essentially want to motivate using volumes, using specific routes, using data, what is feasible, where it's feasible, and what's required. The tendering process in terms of who might get it, if it's third parties, if Transnet does it themselves, if it goes out on tender, that's sort of a separate process that we're not involved. We're just involved in trying to make out the case for what's needed. And that's really the purpose of interface agreement. So we have a couple of engagement structures because the agriculture, the sectors are quite diverse and quite wide, but ultimately the three we agreed on was in the grain sector, which is mostly dry bulk, less perishable than some of the other ones, and specialized infrastructure that's required. The various stakeholders there that will be involved. Containerized cargo, specifically, fruit and wine being the most important ones, are very export orientated, especially out of the Durban as well as the Port of Cape Town being the two biggest ones. And in a small investment working group to actually unpack what the possibilities are. So our thinking is if the industry experts, who most of us are, most of them are members of us, others we drew into the process, can identify the areas, this investment working group can actually advise in terms of what can be done. Right, so we're going to go through those three areas just quite briefly. But the grain sector, this used to be an area where about 80% of it was moved on rail. That's moved down to less than 10% as it currently is. Various routes, so within the country, of course, from silos to mills to animal feed manufacturers, importing wheat, exporting maize, and also exports to neighboring countries, which of course currently takes place on truck. So there's a big movement between, especially the Western Cape, as well as the hinterland, which is mostly the production areas of South Africa, the maize belt stretching between sort of the Northwest Province, Free State, and Mpumalanga Highveld. So there's a lot of reasons why rail declined. Some of it is service delivery related, some of it isn't. We used to have centralized marketing boards, but that was disbanded as we liberalized the sector. And a lot of smaller traders came in with smaller quantities. The concept of just-in-time delivery came in, which played a role. But ultimately, the biggest reason was actually a lack of locomotives and trains. So essentially, it came down to unreliable service delivery. So the situation that a lot of the silo companies and owners have been in for the last 20 or 30 years is there's actually sidings, there's uploading and infrastructure and sidings going to almost each silo in South Africa. But most of those sidings don't run anymore. The companies, individual companies or members are still maintaining them at a cost of, the three biggest companies estimated they each spend about 15 million rand a year on maintaining these silos, sort of in a vain hope that maybe one day they might run again, but there's no guarantee that they will. Obviously, this is a huge cost, and their shareholders are also asking serious questions about them. So the process that we embarked on is actually to assess the feasibility of these sidings. Many of them were never economically feasible in the first place, and that's why. But they were subsidized, in the past to I think alleviate some of the pressure on the road infrastructure, which isn't currently the case. So we need to really look at which ones might potentially be feasible, and that's where the sharing of actual volumes in terms of inloading capacity, what gets inloaded and outloaded out of silos, what gets moved currently on road to where. That is currently taking place, to try and build a business case for which of those sidings might be feasible, which won't be. So just as a bit of a graphic representation, between the sort of 12 biggest grain storage companies, you can see all those dots. Those are the silo infrastructure belonging to, or operated by the different agribusinesses. And almost each and every one of them has got a siding that services them. But the costs associated with sending a locomotive with 4 or 5 wagons to service each one of these silos is simply not feasible. And in the past, I think what has happened is with that reduced service delivery and not being feasible, the whole rail service to the grain industry really declined dramatically. There are a couple of very important sidings, the different clusters, and this is a Transnet slide that I'm just sharing. But essentially, the focus now is to see which one of these might be feasible. So in the discussions that's taking place, we're focusing on the Pareto principle. There's no way we're going to have 80% of grain moved on road again, on rail again. There's no way all of these sidings are going to be economically feasible. But the companies need to know which ones they can actually abandon and stop maintaining. And Transnet, as well as private operators, also need to know which ones are important enough to make it a proper business case. So we're focusing, using the Pareto principle, identifying 5 or 6 routes that actually make up about 80% of the business in this industry. The approach from Transnet's side in our discussions, which I think have been very welcome and supported, is when we identify these, either they need to dedicate sufficient locomotives and the grain wagons, the so-called B fleet, to service these, or they need to open up to third parties. For export specifically, there's also quite a discussion taking place in terms of looking at getting critical and mass to rejuvenate the East London grain terminal, which is currently not working anymore on a public-private partnership basis. And again, it's not necessarily the closest one to the production area, but if you get enough buy-in from major traders and silo operators in agriculture to route it to East London, you get that critical mass, it might be economically viable. There's also the possibility, of course, of the old B fleet wagons, selling them off and operating a hook and haul service. And the discussions have really been quite practical in terms of combining, doing a portion with electric locomotives and then swapping it over to diesel locomotives where the cable theft is quite bad, especially we know going down, for instance, a lot of the movement takes place towards the Western Cape where a lot of the animal feed manufacturers and mills are. After about Wellington, there's permanently interruptions with cable theft. So just unhooking it there and hooking it up to diesel locomotives again. So those are really just sort of the 5 clusters and 5 routes which we believe can have year-round demand and might well sort of necessitate or qualify as a Pareto principle. So essentially, the discussion is having specific hubs and trucking in from all the various silos in the production areas towards a single hub or consolidation point, and from there moving it on rail. So the fruit and wine sector is perhaps a little bit more complicated. It's containerized cargo, which does assist making it multimodal. However, the port capacity and port operations is probably the biggest issue. So we've split our discussions between the Eastern Corridor as well as the Western Corridor, but also including near port storage capacity, such as Balcon, for instance, which can play a vitally important role. So we've looked at, and we're also advising, having these discussions with Transnet in terms of where the fruit production areas are that it might be feasible to look at on either on a concession basis or on a PPP hook and haul basis, dedicating a couple of lines where you have the critical mass. And of course, that information has to come from the industry, and that's the information that we're sharing. But ultimately, getting it to the port is not the biggest issue. Getting it through the port and onto the ship is where the current challenges really are. So if you just look at the total containers being shipped out, and this is not biased, I think, towards the Western Corridor, because that's where we've had most of our discussions, it's growing in terms of real volumes. So the agricultural sector, it's especially horticulture, where after you plant trees, you only start getting the benefits between about 5 or 7 years when they start yielding fruit. It's a very flexible supply model. So in other words, the supply estimates can't be changed at short notice. There are already trees in the ground that are not yielding fruit, and our logistics system is going to have to be built strong enough to be able to handle these additional volumes. And there you can just see from the volumes, in terms of the tree census, the tree and vine census, what's currently in the ground. There's a real expectation that roughly about 20% between now and 2030 that the volumes will grow by 20 to 30%. Just the rest of these slides, and I have to thank my colleagues at the Fresh Produce Exporters Forum and Hordco and a couple of our members who provided this information. But this is just a breakdown in terms of the areas where it's coming from. Of course, with the rail viability, this becomes important. Table grapes, as you can see, again, I mean, the growth from 16,000 FEUs to what's projected by 2030 is around 21,000. And there on the right, you can just see the sort of export destinations. The overall point that we're making is, even though we can have day-to-day discussions in terms of there's a crisis, we can try to resolve the crisis. Ultimately, we need more capacity because the volumes are going to grow. And the general feeling in the sector at the moment is we're trying to catch up with port capacity to meet the current demand, but the demand keeps on growing, and that's not being properly factored into it. And that's where the object of this interface agreement is to try to look 5-10 years into the future and build a strong enough, robust enough system to be able to handle these volumes. Oh, sorry, there's just another graph that came on. So the total volumes you can see here, obviously this last season was a bit of an off season, but they are growing steadily and they're projected to carry on growing. As I mentioned, this can't be, it's quite inflexible supply. One cannot simply reroute these for cost measures, and one can't reduce the supply because these trees are in the ground, these investments have already been made. They just, again, I think it's another way of showing the total areas planted and juxtaposed with the production estimates. Blueberry is quite a small, still a relatively small one, but if you can just look at see the exponential growth. I mean, we've grown from where 10 years ago it wasn't an industry at all to now being the world's 7th biggest exporter, and it's growing exponentially at the moment, also especially through the Western regions. These are the sort of things that need to be taken into consideration and built into the design. I think the next 2 slides is probably the 2 most important ones. There's always been this whenever we've raised this issue, there's, you know, the counter argument has been, but agricultural is seasonal. So do you really want to build a big, you know, a huge, you're not going to over design perhaps or over capacitate the logistics system for something that's seasonal. But actually with new cultivars that extend the season of plants, as well as obviously the rise of citrus in the western areas, you can see, focusing on the Port of Cape Town, there actually isn't a season anymore. The demand is, you know, with the exception of maybe October, November, when there's a brief sort of respite, the demand is fairly consistent the entire year. So even though the commodities might change, there will always be a big demand for reefer exports out of the Port of Cape Town. And I think this does justify a significant sort of you know, investment in increasing the capacity. Also, the other probably very important aspect for agriculture is it's highly perishable. You can see that the different types of products that we export, but it ranges from, I mean, say lemons being perhaps the least perishable, that can last, provided that there's no break in the cold chain, up to about 16 weeks. But this is from the point that it's plucked from the tree to the point that it has to appear in market. But apricots, cherries, for instance, less than 2 weeks. Typically, our biggest ones are roughly about, you know, 4 to 8 weeks is the absolute maximum they can last. And the challenge that we have here is if the waterside operations do not keep pace. First of all, you need more space. You need more stacking space for these reefer containers. They need plug points because you can't have the uninterrupted cold chain. But even so, there's also you know, very clear timeframes in terms of how long you can actually store something close to the port before the quality dramatically takes off. So there's really no way to get around additional capacity to load ships and turn around ships quicker. Right, so just in some of our discussions that I'll share, obviously the quantities and things and specific plans are still under discussion, so that's confidential. But broadly speaking, what's not confidential is, you know, we're having these discussions with TPT, TMPA, as well as TFR and the strategic team. And there's a couple of things that's being looked at. We know that TPT is procuring more RTGs, more SDS cranes, and looking at creating additional space, specifically at Kraaifontein for stacking. But the timelines, the projected timelines, are simply too slow. So essentially, the planning is, if by 2020, you know, by 2026, sufficient capacity might be obtained to meet the current demands. But by that time, you know, the demands would already exceed what's currently projected. So we really do need to drastically accelerate that procurement time. So the other challenge is there is the perception, I think it's a legitimate perception, that the port can cope when it's functioning at 100% capacity with the current volumes, but there's always going to be wind or protest action or strikes. There's always going to be some sort of disruption. It's inevitable. And it's not necessarily anyone's fault. That is perfectly understandable. But we need extra capacity to be able to catch up. Currently, we cannot catch up when there are disruptions. And I think that's where perhaps the current disconnect is. And the perishables can't wait to catch up. We need to be able to do that very quickly. Load shedding also, of course, a huge challenge. So just as a way forward, what we're doing is we're looking at, there are various scenarios in which one can create this capacity. So we've now tasked sort of 3 smaller groupings to look at building scenarios for what kind of capacity is required. Of course, with specifically sharing, sharing information. The scenarios could also be how to handle peak capacity. Do you reroute some of it to the Eastern Cape? How do you make use, for instance, of near-port storage such as Balcon? Do you invest in additional plug points there as a as a staging area? And of course, the feasibility of some of the rail instances. The concept of using the multi-purpose terminal perhaps more effectively. These are all things that will have to go into these scenarios that are built. But I think the basic point is more capacity is needed. An interesting concept as well is asking this discussion, what is actually holding the procurement of these cranes and the RTGs back? Is it capital or is it the procurement process? Because either which one, through public-private partnerships, I mean, this is something that's so important for the sector. We've actually made the recommendation to say, can we look at perhaps splitting what's needed for Transnet between maybe 40% private sector procurement, 60% Transnet direct procurement, hedge your spread the risk a little bit, and hopefully that can speed up the process a little bit. Backup power generation, we know obviously when currently the ports are exempted, I believe, up to at least stage 4. But if we do go beyond that, if we reach stage 8 and there's talks of expanding to our stages up to stage 16, I don't think there's a possibility that the ports will still be exempted. So it's critically important there, and that's another area for potential PPP to ensure that we have backup power generation so that the reefers don't stand in the sun without any power. Again, this is just from the industry. I mean, some of the estimates in terms of where there is land available for potential hubs, for rail hubs, loading hubs in the key production areas, and also just some estimates in terms of what might actually be required in terms of equipment, especially for the Port of Cape Town. And here, as I mentioned, it's a collaborative process. So we're not punting specifically for privatization, but if either through capital or whatever the case might be, that the entity can't procure sufficient capacity themselves, then allow private sector to come in and make up the difference. Finally, I think our last one is the joint investment framework. We have this investment committee where I think this is a well-known slide that's probably been shared with many quite widely in a lot of presentations that Transnet's made. We're looking at a number of possibilities: concessions, operating leases, leaseback agreements, unincorporated and incorporated JVs. But you really need to know the terms and conditions of these for private sector to get involved. And by private sector here, I don't mean specifically competition from logistics companies. That is a very important aspect, but that's not where we can come in and make a real difference, because we're not in the logistics space. But specifically where equipment is required, where there's equipment shortages and breakdown, how can we assist as an agricultural sector and make capital available? But we also obviously need to go into this with our eyes wide open. And that's why there's a whole working group dedicated to actually understanding the detailed terms and conditions of this joint investment framework. Right, so that is in a nutshell what we're busy doing with. I'd also be curious to hear if there's any inputs or comments, but otherwise, just thank you very much for the opportunity to share some of the work we've been doing. Thank you.
Yes, maybe it's you, because I think there was a time constraint with you. You've got another meeting that you will attend, so you won't stay until the end of the proceedings of today's webinar. So maybe if the colleagues want to ask you a couple of questions, would that be in order before you drop off?
100%. Thank you.
Okay, can I maybe the first one to ask you some questions? Is it you rightfully say that in terms of, and we all know, and the media sometimes can take a message and then they portray it in a different way, and we now been very cautious of what we say into the media work, because that also affect our collaboration with Transnet. But in that, I mean, how do you think where the balance is? Because we need to make sure that we drive now to get demonstrated capacity, but there is some constraints that when you work with the public sector, you can't say, cannot say what you're supposed to say. And then there's a time frame as well. And what we can see that the time frame, what we want as private sector and what public sector want is not aligned. And also they don't understand the complexity in the supply chain. So do you have any idea how we can overcome that or bridge that gap?
Yeah, it's exactly the sort of issues that we've been grappling with. Just that's a very, very relevant question. Part of the thinking behind the interface agreement and the meeting that we had 2 years ago in Cape Town was quite a heated meeting. A lot of he said, she said, finger pointing between private sector and Transnet. And then we came to this sort of agreement to say, it's actually, it's part of the process that has to happen. We have to work through this process. None of us, I think, are innocent in the process, but we have to have these open and frank discussions, but have them privately, have them sort of in a meeting space, in a framework where we can have these discussions and it doesn't affect necessarily our relations outside. And another reason why that's incredibly important is, if you do say a lot of things in the media, agriculture, and I'm sure a lot of other industries are the same. We compete with many other countries for shelf space in Europe, in the United States, in the Far East. We have to not be naive and think that these companies might not pick up on that. So if we go into the media and say, the logistics is a disaster, the fruits are rotting in the ports, we might find our market access severely curtailed. Just now Australia and New Zealand picks up on that and uses that to their advantage. So I think it's right that we have these hard discussions, but I do think something like the interface agreement gives us a framework where you can have these almost like a Chatham House rules discussions behind closed doors, come up with resolutions, and then have that in the media. And I think that's a proactive way of doing it. I know the work that we've also been doing, myself and you and a number of colleagues at the business organizations, is really to try and get to that sort of same level of discussion, and to have those discussions on the broader thing with what's needed, both with government as well as with Transnet.
And then the last thing, do you think they understand that the time agency or the tipping point? That's maybe a difficult one, but I think the time frame, it's very sensitive in the supply chain. No,
absolutely. And I think whether it's fully understood, I'm not convinced it's necessarily fully understood, but that's been one of the most contentious issues. Just the example of the RTGs that have now been procured. That's great. It's supported, but it's not needed in 2026. It's needed by the next season. Otherwise, we're going to face serious losses again. So I do think there's still a lot of work to be done to understand the urgency. 100% agree.
Okay. Colleagues, if you maybe can raise your hands and maybe ask questions. I'm not sure. I could quickly see if I can see the hands. Harry, can you help me? Is there any hands?
Yes, Unita, there are questions in the chat room. I see here. Let me go to this chat room.
Okay, if you can help me with that.
When first is the Infotech environment, for example, SARS Smart Border Initiative being taken into account?
It hasn't featured in our discussions, to be quite honest, because I think that's more directly linked with the freight forwarders. So we haven't had discussions on sort of that granular level yet. Maybe some of my colleagues who are more involved in the logistics space might be able to give more input. But at the moment, we've been focusing on sort of some of just what the biggest challenges are. And here specifically, equipment and infrastructure seem to be at the moment one of the biggest challenges. So I think it's very valuable. I'd love to touch base afterwards to get a better sense of that. But I must be honest, it's not something we've really discussed in detail.
Thank you. There's a question from Andrew Walter. So I know that your study has not given any consideration to the Maputo corridor. Any reason why?
Yes, I must apologize. We're right in the middle of the process. So we've had detailed deliberations in the grain sector, which is mostly focused on rail. We've had detailed deliberations on the Western corridor. The Eastern corridor, we have dates set later on in this month, but we haven't had these details discussion yet. The Maputo corridor is vitally important. They must come into it. I know citrus is already exporting quite a bit out of the Maputo corridor. And in our discussions, the basic point that's been made by the Citrus Growers Association is, Transnet mustn't see the Maputo corridor necessarily as a threat. It's complementary, especially from the low-felt, Malalan areas, commodity areas where there's low citrus going from there already. It makes economically sense to send it to Maputo opposed to sending to Durban, and the volumes and the projected volumes are of such a nature that it's not as if it's necessarily going to take business away from Durban. It actually will help to alleviate some of the congestion. So it certainly is part of the discussion, not with rail just specifically, but then maybe the discussions have been a little bit superficial, but essentially from the citrus side, they have looked at looking quite seriously on the Maputo corridor as well.
Thank you, Tio. Anybody else who would like to unmute? And when I recognize you, you can ask the question.
Maybe, Harry, if I just can compliment there as well, is that currently on the Maputo corridor, and I think that's what the World Bank is trying to do, to establish a corridor management institution. And they need endorsement from our government. So they've got endorsements from Mozambique to do that. They're just waiting for the endorsement from our government. And once they do that, we think that there will be definitely a higher focus on the Maputo corridor, because we all know that the border post is sometimes the challenging point in terms of the MK7 and 4, and then it impact on the sailing schedules of the vessels, and also now the rail infrastructure on the Maputo line, hopefully Jan will touch on that, is also not unlocking the rightful capacity to get a comparison, because we analyzed the comparison between the N3 and the N4 corridor, and still the N3 corridor with the sailing schedules is much better than the N4 corridor.
Thank you, Unita. I see Willie Kutsia was unmuted. Willie, you want to ask a question?
Harry, we would love to hear our colleague in Transnet, Willie Kutsia, if he maybe can unmute, maybe he can tell that we're offline or maybe we're online. So we'd love to hear his comment.
Yeah, Willie. Doesn't seem to me he's going to comment on this stage. Right, we've got another one there in the chat room. Will the other ports be shared once you have the info from Adele van den Berg?
Yes, I think the more we create an awareness, the better. I don't think we in private sector, we need to work together, and we need to rope in the public sector as well. So I think what Theo was saying is that we don't portray South Africa as a bad country, because that can impact our availability to market our product. And as I said in the beginning, is the culture, and we must look at South Africa as a supply chain, because we compete with the rest of the world, and we are a very much open economy. So if we can share it and we drive the same narrative, there's no reason why we should hold the information, not at all.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Harry,
Anita.
I'm not sure if there's more questions, but maybe then we can break. What do we break for coffee, and then we come back to Jan? Maybe 10 minutes. Is that fine, Harry? But thank you, Steve. Thank you very much for your insight, and thank you for sharing with us the interface agreement and how the agricultural industry is working. I think we appreciate that a lot. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
So, colleagues, if we can have a coffee break. Yeah, do we have 10 minutes of coffee? Maybe we can come back in 20 minutes past. Is that fine? According to the program.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Prof. Jan. You can continue with your presentation.
Thank you, Harry. I assume you can hear me and you can see my slide.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
From my side, just say happy birthday. So
Thank you.
quite an achievement. I think I can remember about 20 years ago that we started talking about this.
Yes.
And yeah, and that's wonderful what you've achieved with this forum.
Thank you
for
for your
the big
support
one.
as well.
Big hole in South Africa. I'm going to quickly talk about this. I'm probably going to talk on it more on a globular level than was expected, and not going to look at every line in detail, but I think you'll see where I'm going with this. First thing I need to do is find out how to remove remove this board that I now can see. I think I figured it out, sort of, kind of. It covers part of my, but it covers part of my screen, but it doesn't matter. We'll get there, and yeah, we'll get there. I'm just quickly talk about this, and I've talked about it often. It talks to our network and where we are. I call it the original sins of the railway, which is basically 4. That's it, and it's all got to do in a certain sense of the network. Starting in 1870, we saw the golden diamonds. We wanted to get there quickly, so some really clever people at that stage decided we can go for a narrow gauge. That still does with us. So we have lower yield for our freight. A big problem. An act of the Union in 1909, we actually commanded the railway that we created then and was integrated to be politically free. That didn't work. Every farmer, constituent of the national government at that stage, insisted that this network gets close to the farm. So now we have far too large a network, which requires restructuring. Now, we've known this for 40 or 50 years. We haven't done it. And then the fact that the network is too large means low density freight. I'll come back to that. And then in order to solve this, we started cross-subsidizing, which is hugely problematic. And that problem still lives with us today in terms of where we are. Cross-subsidization before 76, what we did, high-value freight was basically just taxed. So if you had something expensive, but remember, you were forced to put it on rail. So the expensive stuff were on rail. You were forced to put it there, and that was taxed to actually pay for very cheap mining and agricultural traffic. The government of the time's plan to develop mining and agriculture. By 76, we built this fantastic export lines. I'll come back to that. We used the money that we made there, and we cross-subsidized the rest of GFP. And then when we deregulate, and when Transnet was formed, there was a big hole in the pension fund. So we used the ad valorem tax on goods, same principle, and the NPA to pay for that debt of the pension fund. So at this point now, we're dependent on the coal export line and ad valorem tax in the ports. That kept the whole of Transnet together, which in itself was a problem. 2 major vulnerabilities. The one has now been removed. If you don't focus on a coal line, you're basically dead as an organization. Pays everybody's salaries, etc. And I think that sometimes became forgotten. Should have been focused on clearly. I'm not going to go through this as saying over many years, our last 150 years, there were so many mistakes made. It is just incredible. And every solution that we've thought of in that time always was 25 years too late. So what we are trying to do with the network now, we should have done in 1995. Sadly, we didn't. And it was on the table then, but it was just never executed. Everything was just 25 years too late, including our best strategy that we had for South Africa, moving South Africa 24 years ago. 25 years ago, nobody bothered to execute it. And since then, all our strategies and policies basically just went awry. Very few proper stuff was developed since then. I think now it's better in terms of got a rail policy at least. The strategy framework that I've seen from the DOT last week doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It's not going to contribute to this. So there's issues around that. The issue around general freight business and the network that we are started talking about is we've known that it cannot work. I asked Dr. Anton Rowan that question a year ago. I said, when you formed this company, you were the first MD. What's the 2 things that bothered you the most? And he said the pension fund and the fact that GFP can't work. And here, the previous Minister of Transport is correct. De Villiers missed this, didn't understand it. The management, as I've said, knew it. There was attempts, failed. There was data on corridors we got. It was just never done. Moving South Africa said, do it. It was never done. So it just stayed gone. You have to engage with this. I know a lot of people don't want to, but our solution, which we'll publish probably in the next week or two, is going to talk to this again. It basically says, if you have a route kilometer, the more ton kilometer you move over that route kilometer, the less it costs. Because you've got a fixed cost business. You can think of a truck that goes on a road. That truck does not pay for the road pavement. It pays a little bit through toll fees. It pays a little bit through license fees. But apart from that, it pays through the fuel levy, but the fuel levy is a variable charge. It's not a fixed charge. So you can't see that as a fixed charge. For rail, it's a fixed charge. So what you must do with rail is you must move down this curve. Move down this curve by increasing density. Now, 1928, that's where we in the USA were. We've improved by a factor of 14 by 2019. The USA by a factor of less than that, but came out more than us. They now run about 16 at the moment. But if you were to look at just GFB, we've improved to there. The export lines improved to the right-hand side. And GFB is back at 1928 levels. So I'm very clear about it. Our current GFB density operation is not much better than it was in 1928, which is a tragedy, because what it means if you index it, like what I've done here, and you throw all of it together, we look good compared to America. But if you don't index, if you don't throw them together, you will see that the coal line's density is tremendous, as is the iron ore line. And the green line, which is a general freight line, if it doesn't look like that, other two is basically dying, and it is dying. So that network is dying. There's no doubt about it. You can circle in and you can put a magnifying glass over any piece of this network. It's basically in a terrible state. And I want to talk to you about how it should be fixed. So we have three distinct rail systems, coal line and iron ore line, and then the core network. Then the density lines, the low density lines that you want to throw away, and I'll talk to them as well. This is just to show GFB on its own compared to America, and you'll see that is the dotted line is what America did, and the green line is what we did. I often hear this. I often hear about, rail is a dying industry, etc. So this is rail progress over the last 20 years for the world. The world's grown 79% in rail. We are basically have grown nothing. We did get somewhere by the year 2015, but then we've just fallen behind, and now we are nowhere. So we are now 2000 levels. If you add everything together, all freight together, we're at 2000 levels, and we have declined. You can compare us to BRICS if you want to, where Indian Rail has grown their freight with 370%. Russia and China were 200%, and as I've said, we've not grown at all. This is not a world trend. This is just us being useless. There's no other. You can look at our BRICS peers, Russia, India, and China together, and compare us to Germany and Italy and Canada, the USA, and so on. You're just looking at ton kilometers. You see the dotted line as our export lines, and you'll see this the other line right at the bottom, which is our GFB line. So you can see the cross-subsidization is very clear there. So where are we in terms of performance? We have a lot of analysis of performance, but the very simple one is the one that we know. Our coal line is now back to 1993 levels. Our export iron ore line is back to 2010 levels. And GFB has the lowest since it's been since the Second World War. So that is where we are. If you just check general freight business out of it, it is not comparable to any reasonable railway around the world, which is basically dead. To any intents and purposes, it's dead, which is quite pity. Another way of looking at it, if you want to compare these three lines, is to look at what it actually is, what it should be, and what is missing. It's important to do that, and I'll say why. What's missing on like export coal and export iron ore and export manganese and minerals is much less than what's missing on GFB, excluding those minerals. The difference here is that export lines, the years in which you don't earn it, is a lot of money at stake. A lot of money at stake. but it is cyclical. So last year we lost about 300 billion rand because of the poor performance of those lines. This year it might be 100 billion because the export price or the price for coal in the world is much lower. It dropped from about $130 a ton to from $300 a ton to $130. The GFB cost is a slow degeneration over time. That's the problem. If you're looking at the right-hand side there, you're just looking at, for instance, the blue lines, the dotted blue and the fixed blue line. You see the difference between what Exalt iron ore should be and what it is. On the green line, what coal should be and what it is. You see a little bit of a bigger gap, but then you see the gap for general freight business is massive. Now, we need the export mineral imports, sales and money in order to fund a manufacturing economy in South Africa, to fund beneficiation. So that is a tragedy. We need GFB to operate correctly so that we can save money on logistics costs. And for that, we have to go and look at what the supply chains look like that we want to serve. So there's 72 billion ton kilometers missing. And if you add to that things like our liner shipper connectivity has been falling all over the show the last 15 years. The last South African Psyche Institute for Civil Engineers report card looks really bad for rail. If you look at the fact that we're supposed to support our manufacturing economy, but manufacturing as percentage of GDP, that was 5% in 1910. We got it up to, in the 1930s, to 10%, then really grown it over time, and now we're back to 1930s level in terms of the manufacturing a percentage of GDP. We are in a process of killing our manufacturing industry. Anything that you can think of, you think about cement, you think about wood, especially if you think about steel, the only shining light probably is cars. And the other graph just said that we need a huge amount of freight to make our economy move compared to any other country in the world. And other ancillary facts, we're talking about that this drop in market share in the left-hand side, I've tracked it from 1937, it's been there. On the right-hand side, the equipment that we've been buying, the dotted black line is GDP, the dark black line is locomotives, and then the other colored lines are trailers and trucks. So we've invested in road equipment. But the reason we did that is because no railway available to run locomotives on. And those that we bid by, there were some issues about it. The 5 supply chains that we try to service in this country, which is export mining, what we've seen recently, it's not working the way it should anymore. It is not highly competent anymore. Domestic mining, we're just using a lot of freight. That ability is going away. Siding to siding, which is our intermediate manufacturing capability for supply chains, is really gone. We've never done finished palletized goods in the domestic intermodal solution. And the rural freight has also declined quite a lot, as we've heard earlier as well. And it should have been improved. If you look from 2011 to 2019, and this is a summary of this. And what you'll see here is this kills our national roads. The fact that we don't get curtain-side content in containers and move them between big hubs. This is the same. Domestic mining kills our rural roads. This 1/3 of freight that is missing basically just kills our rural roads. And here we just lose a huge amount of money because we can't export. And a lot of it's missing. The outcome of this is that current network should be 4 times bigger by 2050. The red is what it is now, and the blue is what it should be now, and the other blue on the right-hand side, what it should be in 2050, which means it needs to be 4 times bigger. Now, can the current network that we have carry that freight by the year 2050? It means that the 50 million tons that we ship at the moment for GFB needs to become 200. It needs to become 4 times bigger as such. And the answer is it can. The design capacity for that whole network is fine. If we can just fix it. And when we look at things like, if we look at density and what the supply chains want, in these various components is the railway that I'm talking about, coal line, the iron ore line, the general freight corridors and low density branch lines, the core line can actually help us there. It can make it work. And but now we need to figure out how. What is the way in which we're going to do it? And how are we going to take this forward? I looked at NatCore first. So this is what NatCore is telling me. Theoretical capacity of 72 trains per day. Because of all sorts of things, that's been then downgraded to 47. We lost 25 trains per day because of these things at the bottom, crime, scheduling, stuff like that. Now becomes a practical capacity of 22, where we tried to sell 10 to 15 slots for trains, and nobody wanted to take it because of excessive turnaround time and unreliability. So currently what we find is the less than 11 trains per day that run there, and sometimes as little as 5. And those 6 things that I mentioned there that actually bothers us in terms of capacity: crime, scheduling, crew changes, aging, signaling, and I said it been twice, and poor maintenance. I think I've deleted one and doubled up on the other one. Doesn't matter. Those things, not all are external to the railway. A lot of it's internal. That things that could have been fixed and could have been done correctly. The money, though, now does not exist anymore to solve any of these problems by the railway as such. So we started here. And here it is for me quite important, because I'm going to talk about it, but I didn't put slides together for a very specific reason. I actually do have a set of slides that still needs to be streamlined. And then we're going to start the discussion around them in about a week's time. So we've done a lot of hard work using that density principle that I've shown you. And we've identified the network that we think is about 5,000 kilometers long, basically 5,000 kilometers. The backlog to rehabilitate this network is probably in the region of 60 billion rand. So if we can find 60 billion rand, this network can be fixed. Question is by whom? I don't think by current Transnet management. I think an external agency. It could be a track agency. It could be an infrastructure agency at the DOT, such as Sunroll. There is 1 or 2 other models as well. There's some funding models available. I've spoken to quite a few people around that. I've got inputs from the World Bank. I've got inputs from other private sector investors in South Africa. Bottom line is, we need to throw 60 billion rand at this thing, and it will be a 5,000 kilometer subtraction, 25% of what you see. 25% of what you see, and that will be able to actually help us make this thing work. That network will be able to carry 100 billion tons and 100 billion ton kilometers, 200 million tons. And once again, it says it will be able to carry freight 4 times the size that it carries now. So we think that can work. We talk about the 2 losses. The 300 billion rand loss because we can't export should be completely eradicated. And then 100 billion rand loss because of poor performance. We think very soon that can be cut to about 25 billion, and very soon that can be eradicated as well. We looked at the business cases. This will have a positive business case for the operators, the rail operators on this line. It will have a positive business case for the users because tariffs should come down. Plus, the network should be more predictable, especially if it's then funded and managed by an external agency. We looked at the principles of separation, as I call it, vertical separation between track and rail. We want to cut off the low density lines. So you see that separation as well between a core line and a low density line. So core here would be the 15,000, 5,000, and low density would be about 13,000. The other 2,000 is the export lines. The terminals being privately operated completely. And we could have some locomotive companies where they do hook and haul arrangements with track. Looking at all of that and looking at this here is where I come. Well, I say, how can a network be tiered? And we say you tier the network between the export lines, number 1, take them out, sell them, or some form of a sales agreement or concessioning or what. And then from that, you will have that core one of 5,000 kilometers. And from that, you will have, you can use rail economic principles to say what should be in there and what should be low density lines. We will pay for it. And then how will you measure the density of solutions? So we answer these questions. The length of the network, 5,000 kilometers. Cost of rehabilitation, about 60 billion. Funding, quite a few different models that's available that we will need to look at. How much freight? As I said, about 50 million tons or 200 billion ton kilometers. Through that, we will be able to make enough money to keep the network maintained then through the charges and to operate it through the various locomotive companies. And there will be no more impediments on export volumes, and we will save that overpayment. So how do we do that? We say, well, the export lines, they take them out. The core line, it could be an infrastructure agency. I often call it SunTrack, but something like SunTrack. Next to SunRail, ran exactly like SunMar is run. There is this Natal corridor or container corridor thing on the table now. There is another option, I suppose, if somebody were to go for that. But remember about rail policy. So the only way to do that would be if somebody goes in there and say, we'll create something where various locomotive companies can compete on a separately established infrastructure company. And that company can then morph into all of the other portions of the network, the 5,000 kilometer network that we have identified. I don't know if that's possible, but that's the only way that it can work outside of the SunTrack type of option. The low density line's easy. They must have safety cases. They can be run with people with much lower overhead. You can subsidize them. Government can provide subsidies for where they think is strategic, and it will be all part of that. So it looks like this, export lines. We have some ownership, maybe the mines buy them. Maybe it's a concessionaire like RBCT. Imagine RBCT buying the coal line. Maybe some sort of an engineering firm with shares from everybody. The core line, something like, as I say, a SunTrack that owns this whole thing, with open access for all locomotive companies in South Africa on it and market regulation. And a low density line, as I said, concessions and things like that. There's been, my last slide, some interesting events recently. We have a new rail policy. It provides us quite a bit of direction. Working with Operation Will and Layla, we're trying to get people to talk to each other. It's quite active at the moment. We're not doing research anymore. We are trying to engage with agencies, with Transnet, with public enterprises, with the DOT, to really get this thing going in the right direction. And in terms of the holding companies, SOEs, we know there's no more DPE. So where should those SOEs go? Maybe this holding company will go to Treasury, I think. And then the president also said that certain SOE functions will go to the ministries. This tells me maybe this is an opportunity, the absolute opportunity to say, wait. Why don't we put the trains in this holding company and send it to Treasury? And why don't we take the track and we put it in a SunRail type of agency and we put it with the DOT? And that's ran along the same principles. That I think doing that, getting the 60 billion that is required, fixing this thing, have rail regulation to sell slots to private locomotive operators and TFR. Somebody said to me, well, what will TFR do? Well, they're currently running 4 trains a day on that core. They can keep on running that. Nobody wants to stop them doing that. There is just so much capacity available that TFR can keep on running what they're currently running, the 50 million tons that they do, because we want to add 150 million to that, which they can't do. And that's what I'm hoping, a roadmap for me in terms of where we can go with this. Thanks. Larry?
No, it's me that needs to take over, Jan.
I hope I was still, it's so quiet. I hope people were still hearing me.
No, I think we're fascinating by your intellect and how you package it together. I think the slides were quite nice. You've paint a picture in terms of the trends, where we're going, and what is the problem and the solution. So I would think that's, I'm fascinating. I sat in front of my computer and I was fascinated by it. So what I want to do is hand over to Claude to maybe give an economic view, and then we will come back to you if you will stay online. Would that be okay, Prof. Jan? Because I think the colleagues want to answer you some questions, because it was an excellent presentation.
I'll be here.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Claude, can we hand over to you?
Well, good morning, everyone. This is my presentation. Can you see it, Manita?
Yes, we can
Yes.
see. You just can put it in presentation mode. Yes, that's fine. Perfect. You can go.
All right. So what I'm going to be speaking about, firstly, I want to commend you on your previous speakers. Absolutely excellent and enlightening. And it's really heartwarming to see that, you know, there's tremendous expertise and knowledge and capacity and goodwill to work on the very, very serious problems that this country is facing. And what I'm going to be doing today is provide a perspective on what's happening in the economy, but we can also talk about the political economy, because, you know, my favorite saying is that there are no technical solutions to political problems. And I think South Africa's problem is primarily of political order. And I am not presenting on it, but I am certainly happy to discuss it and to see how the interaction between the performance of the economy and the political systems are interplaying and resulting in policy. But more than policy, I think our policy problems are secondary to our state performance problems. But anyway, I'm going to start with really a depiction of the economy. This is who we are, Unomics. We are specialists in resilience, and our work is with corporates and multilaterals and governments around the issue of societal performance. Broadly, we've developed a kind of a unique heterodox approach to documenting a country's performance and the risk that arise from that performance, and measuring it and analyzing it, and then understanding it, what it means for corporate strategy as well as for a government's development strategy. So we try to come up with innovative ways of looking at things. This is kind of a secondary level analysis to what we do. We before we go into an economic analysis, we measure state performance, and we measure it in a system where we have about 185 different countries with data on state performance going back to 2006. And we can therefore benchmark South Africa against 180, 200 countries on core variables or core dimensions of state performance. And so it's kind of a 360 perspective. We look at obviously security, national security issues, and crime, the criminal justice system, the safety and security of people. And there's astounding amount of international data on that. We then look at the political system, the nature of the regime, the performance of government, the nature of policies, the quality of government and the institutions, the level of democracy, basic rights, rule of law, and so on. So it's really, if you want politics in a big sense, not, you know, who's in charge and all that stuff. We also look obviously in depth at the economy and economic performance, from effectively growth of the economy to structural features to the fairness and sustainability of the economy. And we're working on a kind of Unomics economic sustainability index. You'll see a small aspect of that. We work on societal performance, so the ability of society to produce, well, you know, satisfying, meaningful lives, education, housing, nutrition, productivity of human factor and things like that. And then we combine all of that in a measure of fragility. You know, how fragile is that particular country and what accounts for that fragility? And then we start trying to unpack why is a country where it is compared to other countries, what are causal and consequential drivers. So when it comes to South Africa, what you're looking at here is really the second level analysis. South Africa, as we all know and experience, is going through significant crisis. And I would say, you know, this is now, you know, possibly from an economic standpoint, the most serious economic crisis the country has experienced for easily 30 years. and probably more, probably 35, perhaps even 40 years. So this is a generational crisis, and it's a generational crisis which does not have an obvious political solution because democracy has been achieved, and there is no readily obvious alternative to that political crisis. And that political crisis doesn't really, it's not as superficial as saying, well, all we have to do is change the political leaders to the top, or we have to simply change political parties. They more fundamental causes to the political system's performance and its impact on the economy. But one thing is very clear, and it's not there because I didn't want to go into that, but as I said, we can always revisit. What's very clear is that the decline of the economy in South Africa is largely the product of internal domestic policy choices informed by politics. And by policy choices, I don't mean simply legislation, regulation, and strategy, but I also mean the inherent quality of the public sector, of the public service, the ability of the state to act as custodian of the common goods of the public interest. And as we can see in the municipalities where you've had coalition governments, it's not as easy as simply changing the particular ruling party of the municipality to see improvements. They are in-depth structural state issues that exist. And actually, I was listening to this conversation, the first presentation, and I thought it gave me an idea of maybe coming up with a framework of explaining what's going on, what's the relationship between the collapse of the infrastructure, the collapse in the economy, and the political structure, the political elite, and how it exercised power. Using, in fact, what would be very useful, a Marxist framework, which separates infrastructure, superstructure, and structure. So I'm going to be working on that, I think, in the next 2-3 weeks. Anyway, let's look at the growth curve of the economy, because this is where I think our problems are. If you look at the black line, what you're looking at is the annual growth rate. And what we see is that since about 2000, we have never recovered to our pre-global financial crisis growth level. And in fact, contrary to that, starting 2012, we have what is called a classic growth collapse, right? So the growth rate continuously declines. There was a small recovery of growth in 2017-18, which we can call, the short-term benefit of Ramaphosa. And then 2019, before the pandemic, we got to growth zero. And the dotted black points are what I call the structural growth rate. So what if you remove the accidents, the external accidents of the global financial crisis and the pandemic crisis, and what if we smooth the curve and we obtain what effectively is the structural growth rate of South Africa? And the structural growth rate of South Africa, if we forecast it, if we push it forward to 2020, because we remove the pandemic and we look at 2022, 23, 24, what we see is that we are in negative growth territory. If you look at the dots, the three colored dots is the different forecasts that are provided by three different perspectives. One is Treasury. And if you are to believe Treasury, we would be growing at a rate of growth which we haven't grown at since about 2013, 2014, in 2023, 2024. And I don't know what these people are smoking, but it's good stuff because they're living in a parallel universe of relatively high growth. You look at then the slightly darker brown dots, that's the latest from the Reserve Bank. And you can see this extraordinary, if you look at 2022, 2023, the distance between the orange dot and the light brown dot, that's the extraordinary difference between the forecast of the Reserve Bank and the forecast of Treasury. Now, how do you explain that? I'm trying to have some conversation with people at Treasury. Just can't explain it, except we've lost a lot of skills. But then you look at that orange line over the black line, and you realize this is the 2-year growth forecast of Treasury. So every year on the budget, they issue a 1-year forecast, 2-year forecast, and 3-year forecast. So if you look at their 2-year forecast, okay, they have been wrong on average between 2015 and 2019 by 1.4 percentage point, which means that which is enormous, not 1.4%, which means that they would be accurate by 98%, 99%. No, they are wrong by about 100%, 80%, 100%. So when they tell you that it's going to grow at 1.4%, remove 1.4 percentage point or 1.2, and you get the probable future growth rate. And that's what we did here. So if you can see my mouse moving, this is the structural growth rate, the growth rate forecast for the numbers. And what we say is that we won't see, as always, when you talk to economists, it's always going to be better in 3 years, right? It's always going to. So if you look at the actual growth rates of Treasury, it's like the line is like something like this. Oh, we're going to go up. We're going to go up. Oh, we're going to go up. Oh, but we don't. We keep going down. Then we have this recovery, but then we go. And then, things will be better in 2 years' time. But these are sleights of hands, because there's nothing that is being done in the political economy, in government, in the economy that would justify the growth rate to be both at that level or to start curving back up. Our view at Unomics is that we are facing a situation where 2023, 2024, structurally the economy is going to be in negative growth territory or just zero, which is very dangerous because of this. Because we are a country where the population keeps growing, and it's growing at more than 1% per annum. And what we are seeing, and this is actually supported by data, is that since about 2000, GDP per capita has peaked. Now you can say, well, it depends on what currency and you choose. Yeah, it's true. If you take rand PPP, then it hasn't really started declining until 2019, the pandemic. But if you look at it on a comparative international basis, so dollar-based, but on a PPP basis, what we see is that relative to our competitors, our peers, South Africa real income is decreasing. So not only are GDP per capita levels no longer increasing, they are, depending on the unit of measure, either stagnant or decreasing at an accelerating rate. But relative to other countries, our competitors, our income level, and because of that, our relative ranking is declining. So South Africa in 2000, GDP per capita was at world level, and in 2005, and we were about twice as high as middle income countries. So we were an upper middle income country, and we were about 3 times as high, our GDP per capita, to lower middle income countries. That relative position has eroded, and if you look at where we are in 2020, it's just absolutely astounding. And the turning point is really around 2012, 2013, as you can see here with our growth rate. Something happened here, 2012, 13, 14, where our economy started experiencing what we call really a structural decline. That is, a decline in performance which is not caused by external factors or temporary internal domestic factors, but by the way the economy functions, by the productivity, by investment, by things like that. And I'll share a graph with you on that. If things continue on path, by 2030, South Africa will be approaching lower middle income states. And that has huge implications, has huge economic implications for you. It has huge implications for the fiscal capacity of the state. It has huge implications on your customers, your clients, the presence of middle class or its absence, and it has huge implications on socio-political stability. So this is extremely concerning. As a matter of fact, if we look at a number of variables, South Africa is now one of the countries experiencing the fastest economic crisis and collapse of all countries. You know, kind of Argentina level, right? And kind of Turkey level, but without the capacity of the Turkish state, and without the ability of kind of political culture, which you know turned a struggling Turkish state into a kind of neo totalitarian regimes, where the state can then close down and control society. We don't have that. We have a very weak state. This is the work we've been doing for some time now on this notion of building an economic sustainability index. What you're looking at here is effectively an input-output analysis of an economy, and where you have 5 essential sectors, 4 sectors and 1 outcome. So input is capital, so it's savings. So it's the money that goes into an economy and the labor that goes into an economy. What resources do we have? And we could add in there, for instance, our natural resources, our environmental capital, and all this stuff. And there is now increasing amount of data that allows us to do this kind of natural capital accounting. But here we're looking at savings, FDI, private sector debt, because a lot of now the money that's coming into the economy is debt by the private sector. We actually have one of the highest in the world, and certainly the highest here amongst our peers, which are Bangladesh, Botswana, Brazil, Chile, India, Malaysia, Mozambique, here, kind of mix of emerging countries. We are the one with the highest private sector debt in GDP, very, very close to Lebanon level, with second highest in the world next to Lebanon. Now that should give you assurance. The debt to GDP of the private sector is something we don't talk about, but it's about 160%, 170% of GDP, far greater than government debt. So FDI, we are one of the worst performing, rank 7. Savings, we are rank 6. We are very low savings, very low FDI, very high level of debt. Government debt in GDP is average, but it is growing rapidly, and now with the growth collapse and the numbers that we've seen from Treasury coming out, you know, where our GDP is going to be nowhere where we expect it to be, or they expect it to be not high. We can expect significant increase in the debt load of government, and then population employed, right? So the availability of people in the economy. We are the second worst. So very, very few people work, about 15, 17 million in a country of 60 million, one of the lowest rates in the world. But unlike India, which is the worst performer, it's not, you know, even if India has very low employment in the economy, they have 1.3 billion people. So, you know, even 12% of that population is employed. You know, you're talking about 200 million people working, and that creates economies of scale, right, which we don't have. In our case, you're talking about, you know, 12 million people, 15 million people. It's just not enough to be competitive. And then fixed capital formation, right, investment in productive investment. We are the second worst, next to Brazil. Nothing to be proud of. So that's on the input side, and because an economy, as I said, is a bit like a power plant. You know, you need input, you need capital, and then all of that gets churned. And if it's productively churned and create economic activity, net value add and then GDP growth, or it's negative or badly employed. So what's interesting here is in terms of value creation, it's exactly what the professor said earlier. You know, so we are not very good at productivity. And the tragedy of our productivity here, the direction of our productivity over the past 10 years or so is very concerning. We are experiencing a real decline in our total factor productivity between 2011 and 2019 of about 12%. So it's not an attractive investment proposition, right? We are losing track of that standpoint. The result, you know, we still hire, you know, we are deindustrializing, right? Our manufacturing is still relatively reasonable compared to peers, but it's decreasing. Our service sector is very high. I don't put this as a good thing, so I put it not because if our service sector in the GDP is very high, it's because of the damage being done to the real productive sectors, i.e., manufacturing, agriculture, mining, etc. So it's not that we have, if you had very high productivity of labor and you had a very high productive sector and higher unemployment, you could say, well, you know, maybe we're deindustrializing because we're shifting from the manufacturing industrial economy to the knowledge economy. Well, that's not the case. We are transitioning to people losing their jobs and being unemployed and being poorer because of economic destruction. One of the best areas of performance is still our export sector. And that obviously is extremely relevant to this conversation. For all of what is going on, relative to peers, South Africa is still managing to be exporting products that the world wants. But that obviously depends on an effective logistics system, transports. And this is something that obviously we're dealing with. Now, this is kind of an interesting one. This is consumptions and income. So all of this leads to this, if you want, in a way. But you can obviously conceptualize it slightly differently. But this is how we chose to conceptualize it, because it's, for us, it's you need money, you transform things, and then that results into incomes and distribution of incomes, and then tax and government expenditures and the like. Otherwise, you're just borrowing yourself into crisis. So we have a very high consumption in capita in GDP. Again, I would say if we were an advanced economy that rely on advanced high-tech sectors and services, that's okay. But here it's bad because in essence we are borrowing money to import stuff to consume, and that stuff is what, as I said, funded by borrowing. Our GDP per capita, we are experiencing fast decline in that, and then this is where we are the worst. The worst inequality, well, the worst inequality. State transfers, we are the worst in the sense that you could say we are the best, in the sense we have the best welfare state in the world. But our welfare system is completely unaffordable because it is not creating social human capital. It is simply money that the state is borrowing to pay to a massive amount of people who are not working, are not being educated, and are not productive, and are consuming at the margin here, right? And they're consuming basically to survive, and that's debt funded. Our tax in GDP is the highest, and our government GDP is the second highest. So you would have hoped that this would lead to better investment and better productivity. It does exactly the opposite. What we have is a system where we are fundamentally not productive and competitive. We do not generate endogenous capital. The capital we have is borrowed which leads to massive amount of government expenditures, which are then used to subsidize the poor, who are mainly unemployed and unemployable, and taxes paid by a very narrow base of people and businesses who are saying no more and are on an investment strike and are borrowing rather. So this is very, very concerning. Overall, if you add all these indicators together, South Africa is the worst ranker amongst our peers. Now on to the trade and logistics performance. What I've been doing is I've been working with SAF now for about 5-6 months. One of SAF's employees is doing a PhD dissertation, which is very important piece of work, which I think is going to be very useful for the sector, is to try to measure through data the efficiency, the performance of the logistics system at national level. But it can also be utilized to measure the performance of the logistics systems at the level of an actor, a company, whether it's a service provider in logistics, or whether it's an entity like a port, or whether it's a specific corridor. And what we've done here is, I mean, it's very similar. The outcomes are very similar to the graph that Professor showed with you. We're effectively back into performance where we were in 2000. Unfortunately, we don't have 2000 data because this is based on the LPI, the Logistic Performance Index. So what we've done is we've taken a number of indicators of performance of logistics, GDP, obviously we've measured, but that's kind of our benchmark. Trading GDP, trading goods, total cargo volumes, cargo in trade, and cargo in GDP. And what we are seeing is that there was some of those variables improved and peaked at about 2015-16. And then most of these indicators have gone down. And I will share those slides so that you guys can have them come back to us if you have questions. But what is very clear, obviously, is that the economy is treading water. We are going absolutely nowhere in a hurry, particularly if you discount that with GDP per capita, then we are actually lower on GDP per basis than we were. Trading GDP in 15 years, trading GDP has increased only by 22%, which is absolutely nothing if you compare that to population growth. So in terms of population, again, per capita, trading GDP is stagnant, if not negative. Cargo volumes have increased by about 30% in as we said, 15 years or so, which is extremely low compared to our peers. Cargo in trade has decreased significantly. It's back to where it was. No doubt the pandemic played a role, but you can see that process started, was in full swing in 2019 before the pandemic, and hasn't recovered, hasn't been kind of a post-pandemic recovery. And then cargo in GDP, cargo in trade is this one, and cargo in GDP has declined significantly. If we look at another way to measure that, this is compared to peers, and we've included the LPI index. So it's broadly measuring South Africa's logistics performance by mixing all these indicators. Shows you that South Africa, in terms of its overall logistics and trade and logistics performance, this index that is building, it's purely experimental, but it shows that if you take 2007 as the base, I mean, this is India's logistics performance. It's increased by 50%. Mozambique, about 50%. and then Malaysia by slightly less than 20%, Chile so 20%, Brazil about 15%, and South Africa, we're back to where we were. And this is the key theme, right? So just these are my contact details if you're interested. This is the key theme, is that South Africa experienced circa 2000 an expansion of the economy, significant gains, but insufficient gains to offset the political balance within the ANC in favor of the gear people, the growth people. And that leads you to the revolution of 2007. I call it revolutions. In Gramscian terms, it's called an organic revolution, where the elite itself it's almost like a palace scheme. And the replacement of the kind of nationalistic economic policies of Mbeki, Mandela and Mbeki, which were starting to create results with a nationalistic, populist, anti-growth, state-centric perspective, but underwritten by effectively a gangster project, like state capture and the plundering of state resources. First by taking over the intelligence services and the prosecution and the police, so that the criminals justice system is immobilized, then taking over the parastatals, then plundering that, and then the final time taking over the treasury, which then led to the second organic revolution, which is Zuma being kicked out, replaced by Ramaphosa, and supposedly his pro-business, pro-reform buddies, but that was not quite the case, and we have seen that now. It's been 5 years of counter-performance, and because no fundamental changes have been brought to the structure of politics, and no fundamental changes have been brought to policies and to the role of government and business sector, we now have this veritable, collapse. Right, the economy can no longer sustain the system as it works, and the next 24 months are critical for South Africa, and we at Genomics are very, very concerned about what's going on. And we have some very serious doubt as to the unity of the country over the next 24 months to remain even in the bad situation. We have some pretty dire scenarios, and then we have some worse scenarios, and then we have some, well, perhaps if something fundamental were to happen, that would keep people in gear. But right now, we're very concerned. And I must tell you, I've lived and worked in the DRC. I've lived and worked in Côte d'Ivoire during the Civil War. I've lived and worked in Mauritius in the 1970s when the economy and country were collapsing. Nobody knows that, but there was a state of emergency. I've lived and worked in Kenya. I am currently working in Lebanon on the reconstruction of the port of Beirut. I have a fair experience of state failing, state collapse, and this is looking good.
Thank you, Claude. Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Professor. Maybe there's some questions because you paint for us not a good picture, but I think it's better that we see the reality and we take knowledge of the reality and see what we can do. So let's see if there's some questions. I know, Harry, did you watch for us the chat box?
I will get to the chat box now. Thank you, Jan. I can ask Claude, if possible, to remain keeping your video on, your camera. Thank you.
And maybe, Claude, I don't know, we hear your sound is not so good, but I don't want to change it now because we just have 7 minutes left to discuss the questions. But maybe, Prof, if I can go back to you, do you think it will be a good idea if the RBCT take over the coal line and maybe then the port operations and the loading of the vessels?
I semi that there's some variations on the theme. If we look at operations like this around the world, usually the conveyor belt that takes the produce to the sea belongs to the mine. So that's the starting off point. So Billiton or many other places around the world, they will develop the mine and then they develop the railway line. The railway line basically just becomes a pipeline or a conveyor belt that take your produce to the sea. That's the standard starting point. So if you look at the iron ore line, most people might know that the iron ore line wasn't built by Transnet. It was built by Iscor, where that stage was the owner of the Sishen iron ore mine, and they actually built this thing hook, line, and sinker, and it was given to Transnet at a later stage. So it was developed correctly. Now the coal line does have differences. There I completely agree with you. One of them being that there's more than one mine that uses it. So one can say it should actually be bought by all the mines together in some sort of a holding company, same way that the mines own RBCT. But then there's also other operators that would like to enter the market over time. So one will have to think about that. And then there's other freight that uses the line. It makes it slightly more comfortable, complex. I agree with you there. I still think it should be completely ring-fenced, and I still think the ownership structure of such an integrated, I think there's no doubt in my mind, the way in which it operates, this is an integrated system. The reason why it can reach 80 million tons per annum is because track, when it's run correctly, track and signaling and train scheduling and all of those things form just the way in which a conveyor belt works. But a company like that, a holding company for the coal line, could have various options in terms of shareholding. Maybe the mines have shares in it. Maybe Transnet, or not Transnet, the government still has a golden share. It will be subject to rail regulation. That will solve many of those problems as well. It has to be ring-fenced and managed separately, and that might be an integrated company that runs it, the way that you would run a pipeline. I've seen.
Then Jan, maybe there's a question from Mark Daniels also that he asked you about, and you know him, Rail Runner, that will assist. So I don't know if you see this question in the chat box.
I see that. I think Rail Runner, what you will need to consider, Mike, is that you now, let's say for instance, we have the Suntrack type of organization that we talk about that works exactly as Sunrail. Then an organization like Rail Runner can do one of two things. You can get your own locomotives and just buy a track, a slot. Or alternatively, you can make an agreement with a company such as Traction or Grindrod or whatever to do a hook and haul agreement with you and run the service. And it could also be TFR that runs the service for you. What you will know is that Suntrack is in a very good condition, the 5,000 kilometers, and you will be able to run your Rail Runner between the various segments of this 5,000 kilometer track, basically. I think that's where the future is going for us as such.
Thank you, Prof. Jan. Mike Daniel also asked, he said that according to your presentation, it appeared that the supply chain in SA needs to also rethink as the current system is no longer fit for purpose. What is government's appetite to do so?
Sorry, what is the first part of your question? What is not fit for purpose?
It would appear that the supply chain in South Africa needs a wholesale rethink as the system is no longer fit for purpose.
I'm gonna talk out of the house now, and I don't care doing it. I mean, when Operation Vulindlela was re-established after we've done all our research in October of last year, I sat in a presentation that I wasn't doing the presentation, where the people who was in charge of Vulindlela told Minister Gordhan the direction they want to take now. And Minister Gordhan says, that's all fine, but tell me, what does the logistics roadmap for South Africa look? And then you can come and tell me what is the Transnet roadmap. And nobody can take a logistics roadmap off the shelf. So after moving South Africa of 1998, which was the last proper policy document that we have as far as this is concerned, for 25 years, the DOT has not given us a logistics roadmap. So the question is, we don't have a logistics plan for South Africa. We don't have one. It's an incredible sadness if you think about it. It is just madness. I'll just call it madness. Madness that we are willing to say in 2023, there's not a plan against which we can plan. One just does not exist. So if you ask me, is the plan that we've got fit for purpose? No, because there is no plan. There's nothing. We will have to recreate in this process very fast because we haven't got time. Just recreate what it is that we think the logistics, we call it the supply chain structure of this economy should look like. A lot of very clever people around this room. I heard Juanita present. I heard some of the other people present. I think kind of all know what it is, but we don't have a formalized thing that says this is what it should look like. And I'm not talking about the big academic exercise here. We are thinking of something that we can put together in the next week or two. We go back to Minister Cordana and say, this is what the supply chain structure of South Africa look like. Therefore, this is what should happen to Transnet. We see this as an exercise of weeks. In fact, Juanita, I would like to present our first views around that at the next integrated forum meeting between OV and US. That's the time frame we want to put on top of it.
Yes, I think you're quite right, because we look at the corridor as well, because we don't, as we discussed, we don't want to go from a public monopoly to a private monopoly, because that will not fit well. So we're very vocal on the container corridor as well. But Claude, there's a question for you as well. I don't know if you saw that in the box.
Sorry, Juanita, let me just pick up on what Professor Havanga has said, because I think he's absolutely correct. I know that my presentation probably is a hit in everybody's stomach, and they don't necessarily want to hear it, but we all know that this is what's going on. And I must say that indeed the issue is now critical, to the point that, and this is a conversation we've been having with Juanita and her team, is that we don't have time, this country doesn't have time for perfect plans at this point. And it doesn't have time, nor does it have the government focus or the capacity to, again, go through a 10 or 15, 20-year strategy. I think what we must do, and I wrote a piece a few months ago, which was shared with the presidency, which was called A Strategy of 1,000 Small Steps. What we need are 1,000 small steps across the board of the economy, where those who have the most at stake in a particular aspect of the economy, which is vital, must then effectively identify the easy steps. What are the key roadblocks? What are the key government actions? What are the key investments that can be unlocked by very simple decisions? And can we concession this line, or can we contract its management out? By whom, when? And not going with government with a cap in hand. That's not going to work. I think what needs to happen is proposals that are practical, that are effective, and for which the private sector has already done, on which the private sector has done a lot of work, and can say, government, if you unlock this, if you press that button, if you use this regulation and that legislation, if you get this minister to sign on that particular act, then this will allow us to do X, Y, Z. And the point about that is that I had a very interesting conversation with someone who's working at the presidency. We can't afford to wait for the next elections and the very uncertain outcome of those next elections. We must help this particular presidency, whether we believe it or not, whether we like it or not, whether we support it or not. And going to these different ministers, not at the ministerial level, but I think the presidency needs to be a key interlocutor here, and saying, we have a proposal for you which will solve this and that problem. Without politically
I want to ask you, because I don't want to keep the colleagues too long, because we over our time. So maybe we just can look at your last question that I asked you there in the chat box. I think there was a question specifically for you in the chat box.
Within government structures, right? Which department can transport logistics look for? Well, look, it's not that capacity is entirely absent. I mean, we can see, we can disagree with how it was done. We can disagree with the philosophy. We can disagree with the implementation. And we see that there was tremendous amount of waste and corruption, but government was able very effectively, and it's been recognized globally, to manage the pandemic, right? It was a sudden emergency, and the presidency and the ministry concerned were able to contain the pandemic, to roll out the vaccines, and to really reduce its impact in terms of loss of life, compared to what happened in many other countries. Now, there's a lot of things we don't know about, whether they were not genetic or other conditions that impacted it. But relatively speaking, government showed that it had the capacity to do something under emergency. And I think we need to be encouraged by that. But it's about finding the right levers and the right people in government. And I reiterate that I think it starts at the presidency, because it's effectively acting, the different ministers in the presidency are acting a bit like the cabinet of a prime minister would act in other governments, or the National Security Council would act in the US government, in the presidential regime. Obviously, you can look at the successful restructuring of SARS taking place. You know, so there is capacity. It's a matter of not asking too much out of a government that doesn't have the shelf life anymore, and is really trying to avoid the worst.
Thank you, Claude. Then I'm going to ask Professor, I'm not sure if you saw that question in terms of the rail and the road, and then we could conclude. That's the last question, because I think we're over our time. I believe that the trucking industry wouldn't just stop providing the service because of the rail. Would it be a better option to freight modal split? And how do you propose the best option?
Is this we won't stop providing services? Oh yeah, no. I think we've on a theoretical level solved. We know exactly what needs to be done. We know we're looking at domestic intermodal services. We know by now that if we can get perfect domestic intermodal services, trucking as such will still grow by a factor of 2 by the year 2050. We know that routes, and I'll take a very specific one, the Cape Town route, most blue chip truckers say what they would rather do is own the customer, go and pick up the freight, palletize freight in containers, take the containers to a terminal here, Kraaikom or Belcon, run shuttle trains up to a terminal in Gauteng, offload it, and then deliver it to client. It's a 100 times better solution. It will take away half of the trucks on the N1 off the road. There's very few people in this country that do not agree with that. And I'm just quoting, most importantly, Gavin Kelly. Gavin Kelly would agree with that. And being the CEO of the RFA. I know of many of the big blue chip trucking companies in South Africa, or even bigger integrated logistics service providers that's behind this plan, that 100% want to do it. I've seen numbers, I've seen feasibility studies from companies, and I'm not going to mention who it are, so I just say companies like Bidvest, Imperial, Supergroup. Many of them has got rail divisions. They're integrated companies, and they want to integrate rail into this whole thing. So the way in which they should work together is not the problem. The problem is to get rail to come to the party. That's the problem. And in order for rail to come to the party, it has to be properly capacitated. The right investment must go into it, the 60 billion for inter alia that I spoke about. Rail just needs to be fixed and then be forced into the system. Rail never wanted to wholesale freight. It's time to do it. So we know what to do.
Then based on that, I think we can conclude today. And Harry, the last chat in the box, or the second last one, is for me really evidence of what you do with your collaboration. For Mike to give his personal cell phone to DOT, that will give you a lot of pleasure. So I hand back to you, and thank you, colleagues, for listening to us. And I hope we create a little bit of more insight in your environment and help you to drive us to build a better SA Inc. Thank you very much, Harry. I hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Unita. I would like to commend our panelists for today, and it was absolutely excellent presentations and well-researched content, even though so concerning. But yeah, let's collaborate with the likes of SAF and so on to make the country work again. And we really appreciate you sharing your valuable knowledge with us. Thank you, Unita, for supporting the Transport Forum, for chairing today and hosting us. We really appreciate it. And guys, take care, and we see you in the next forum again. We would like to play out with a corporate video of South African Association of Freight Forwarders. So thank you very much, and take care. See you next time.
What does it take to compete on the world stage? To go head-to-head with the best of the best? Excellence, agility, resilience, the willingness to keep on evolving. It takes courageous leadership to be bold and chart the course, to connect the dots, bringing stakeholders together, to overcome the hurdles we all face, and to deliver best practice. It's about business at the click of a button, delivering at the speed of the internet, connecting people, products, and places, strengthening our supply chains, faster and more cost-effective than ever. Since 1921, we've given voice and vision to the freight forwarding industry, navigating the tides of international trade, evolving ever more sophisticated supply chains, bridging local and global markets to move our economy forward. Welcome to our world. The South African Association of Freight Forwarders, architects of transport for over a century.